Hi, I'm Leah Sargent. I run otherfeminisms.substack.com, which is a group dedicated to defending the dignity of dependence. And I'm talking to Stephanie Murray, who is a writer on parenting and more broadly what we owe to one another for The Atlantic. Because, Stephanie, you had a recent story you were telling about how you and other parents in the community support each other that I was interested in. And you called it a baby swap. What is the baby swap?
Yes, yes. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of what it sounds like, I guess. We the basic setup as it exists now is on Tuesdays and Thursdays. There are a couple different families on each day, so it's sort of just forget about that, but whatever. Basically, one family will take all of the kids, right?
How
And
many kids are we talking here?
so on Tuesdays, what did I say? I think it's 7 kids, and then on Thursdays well, no, maybe I'm mixing it up. I think it's 6 kids on Tuesday, and then like 7 to 9 on Thursday. But
Mhm.
a couple of those kids are kind of older, so a lot of times they just don't come. And when they do, they're almost more like babysitters. They like
Yeah,
help, you
you're
know.
rooting for them to come.
Yeah. And so, yeah, one family will basically take all the kids from 5 p.m. to 8 p.m. so that the other parents can go out to dinner or just do laundry, whatever it is.
Yeah, it
And
sounds really great. We do, I would say, a much more limited version of Baby Swap, which is just inviting other parents and kids over for dinner, where
Mm.
no parents get, a full break. But
Mm.
having other kids in the house enlivens our kids, and means there's something besides discussing whether or not they will eat what I made for dinner, and the answer is no, right?
Yes.
And we get other parents to talk to. How did you start doing Baby Swap? Did people think of this as an ongoing thing from the beginning? Was it kind of a one-off that grew?
Yeah. So, okay, so I think that, yeah, knowing the origin of baby swap is actually helpful for understanding, I think, why it has lasted so long. So it started during COVID, basically. It
Mm,
was I live in the UK. I had moved to the UK at the end of 2019, basically a couple months before COVID broke out. And the UK had a couple of pretty harsh lockdowns where you really didn't have the option legally of convening with other people. It was just really rough. So in early 2021, it was just things were bad in our household. I was not doing well. We had 2 kids who were what, 1 and 3 at the time. I'm 2 very young kids, and just so little help. We were living in a country where we hadn't had any time to like meet anybody or build out
mm.
systems of support. It was very isolating. And so yeah, it was just sort of desperation. There was a group chat, the reason we moved over here, I guess you need to understand, is that my husband works for this company. It's an American company that has an office over here. And so there were other parents at, you know, American parents who were in a similar position to us, where they were living over here and dealing with COVID. So I didn't know any of these people, but I just sent out this message to the whole group of people that I didn't know, basically being like, hey, in the guidelines of the lockdown rules, technically you are allowed to create basically a childcare bubble with one other family.
Mm. Mhm.
Does anybody want to be in my
Yeah.
bubble, right? Like, we could work out something where we could just sort of like watch each other's kids in order
Mhm.
to handle the situation. And so one other family who just happened to live right around the corner from us, sent me a message and they were like, yeah, we would love to do this. They were in a very similar situation.
Mhm.
They had 2 very young kids, slightly younger than ours, but it was really similar. And so that's how it started. And I think, so I can't remember exactly what it was, but it was something like maybe on Tuesdays. One week I would watch their kids for a couple of hours, and then the next week they would watch our kids. And that's how it started. And so,
But you've added another family to your rotation.
oh, yes, no, so it's grown since
Mhm.
then, even though that this we need it less, right? It's weird.
Mhm.
And I've been reflecting on this a lot lately, where it's actually, in some ways, I don't know that I predicted that this would outlast the pandemic. And I
Mhm.
definitely didn't predict that it would actually grow to expand other families. And so I've been sort of thinking about, well, why is that? Like, what happened that allowed this to sort of turn into this really cool thing. Um, and I think it comes down to the desperation of the mutual desperation that underpinned it meant that we were going in with very low standards, if that makes sense. It was like we were both like, hey, keep my kids alive for
Yep.
3 hours so that I can go. We couldn't even go to restaurants, right? Like everything was locked
Mhm.
down. Me and my husband were literally just, we need to go on a walk together without our children to
And
like
as I
get some
recall, in England at that time, if you stopped for too long on a walk, you could get busted by the
Yeah,
cops.
and you
Yeah.
couldn't like sit on a bench with
Yeah.
somebody, you know, that it was that intense. So it was literally it was so low standards and we were just like, "Hey, keep my kid alive." And so I think those terms of kind of this very low stakes thing of just like make room for my kids in your household for a couple of hours so I can
Mhm.
get some space was kind of integral to keeping it going because it felt very natural. It felt very easy. It didn't feel like this big thing to invite these kids into my house. And I think that was mutual. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'm curious about how big a contrast this is with kind of high intensity parenting. Because what you're describing, like, I want you to keep my kids alive, like, hopefully the kids are reasonably happy about the arrangement, is very different than when I try and book a babysitter on care.com or in a professional context. I'm looking at babysitter profiles where it's like, and I have the following early childhood things, or I can teach Spanish to your child. I'm like, I want you to watch my child for like 2 hours during dinner and then put them down for bed. I just want you to be nice to my kid. And I understand in a kind of market situation why people are advertising what sets them apart from another sitter. But
Yeah.
it's very wacky for me booking childcare. I say, like, look, these kids are 4 and 2. I want you to read them a bedtime story and tell them they have to stay in bed. And that's you're not even on the hook for whether they eat dinner. I tell sitters, I ask you to put dinner in front of them, and that's all I can really ask. So,
Mm.
has this changed anywhere else in terms of what you see as the standard you're trying to meet as a parent or with caregivers, or for yourself as a caregiver?
It's interesting. I mean, there is certainly, I've observed kind of the contrast between, you know, when these families let me watch their kids, I would not like pass muster as, they would not hire me as their
Yes.
daycare, you know what I'm saying? Just
Mhm.
for a bunch of reasons. Like my house is constantly, like they would just, there's so many things would be
It
like,
does
hmm,
not sound like you guys have the right ratios either, frankly, for a
yeah, yeah,
certified daycare.
totally, right? Exactly. It helps that all of the husbands are also involved. It's not
Okay, yeah,
usually
that does make a
just one
difference.
parent.
Then
It's
you're
both.
then legally you're in the clear, not
Yeah.
by any other like metric, of course.
But then, yeah, so I think that there's just been a very obvious sort of discrepancy. The vetting process has just
Mhm.
been totally different, and I think that made sense early on, and then over time it sort of revealed itself in a variety of ways where it's sort of I don't know, it's just a different approach. People are just, in order to opt into this, they're using a very different approach for vetting a childcare provider than they would under other circumstances. But people are just doing it, I guess.
And I saw
Um,
you brought this up when I saw you telling the story initially on Twitter in response to a post by a woman with the, wackily named blog Cartoons Hate Her.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
That was about kind of the cost of raising your children with the support of a village. That it's something that
Yes.
sounds like a good idea in theory, as long as you picture the village as populated by clones of yourself, or maybe even slightly augmented, better clones of yourself.
Yes.
But like if you're actually having people watch your kids, like having them have some level of authority or like big stake in how they're raised, it's very low odds that everyone in your neighborhood or even the people you trust have the same parenting standards as you do, whether it's that they feed your kids different food, they use a sharper or gentler voice than you think is merited when one kid is hitting the other. So what have you had to give up as a parent or as an imagined author of your child to draw so much on other families?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think the thing for me, the thing that I don't even want to say that I struggle with it because I think that this idea has really proven itself to me over time where my kids are fine. Like there are
Mhm.
definitely differences between how I parent, the rules in my household, and the rules in everybody else's household on any number of things. And my kids are totally fine and they have a great time. And there's never been something horrible that's happened or anything or concerning, right? Um, but I would say that the thing that I struggle to kind of like relinquish control over is screens. Like I am like kind of a nut about screens. That honestly pre-exists even having kids. Like I'm weird about having TVs in my household. Like we have a room with a TV because like I can't handle the like stimulation of having a TV on just in the background. So I can just
We
be
have our
weird about
TV in the basement, so it has to be a deliberate choice that you're going to go watch something. And it
yes.
can't both be casual and it can't be something the kids can ask for casually because the basement is locked. So it's more of a
Yes.
sick day, very long weekend day thing where this might happen, or the Olympics,
Yeah.
but not an everyday thing.
Yes, okay, so that's very similar to how we have it set up, and that was intentional on my part. My husband wasn't crazy about that. He definitely came from more of a family where it was kind of like the TV's just always on,
Mhm.
and he liked that. I hated that growing up. That was also true in my household. So we don't do that. And then also, I do think that I just like tablets kind of make me nervous. Like I just it's the thing that I sort of that feels almost like it's always felt like almost like a Pandora's box situation where it's like once you start with the screen time in the tablet use, then it's just gonna get away from you, right?
Mhm.
Um, but there are kids in this baby swap that have tablets, right? And there are families where watching a little TV in the evening is part of their routine, right? And so that is something where I have to sort of trust, like, okay, you have a system for regulating the use of screens in your household, right? And I I don't think it's possible for me to sort of say, well, no, 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 you need to adopt my system, right?
Mhm.
In order for me to send my kid over there, right? Jane's had already watched 30 minutes of TV today, and that's how much I let her, or whatever it is,
Mhm.
right? I just don't think that's how it works. And I was, when you reached out about this, I was trying to think about why is it that I don't think why can't it work that way, right? And I think that it's not that there isn't something transactional going on here, right? It's not like, with a daycare or hiring a babysitter, you're giving money for a service, right? And there's something transactional happening with baby swap, right? But I think that the nature of the transaction is very different, right? It's not like I'm providing a service where I'm going to, it really can't be. I think it's impractical to sort of be like, well, I'm going to turn my house into a daycare for
Yeah.
3 hours every Tuesday
Mhm.
and sort of do exactly what it is that you want. I think the transaction is more like, I'm going to make room for your child in my household for the evening. And you're going to do that for me, right? Like you're going to make room for my child in your household next week, right? And that is a much more manageable transaction, and it's a much more trusting one. And I think that crucially, it's one that I think because when we're thinking about village building, right? And I guess I should say, like, it's not like when I started this baby swap, I was thinking, how do I build a village, right?
Yeah.
But that's what it's turned into, right? It really has turned into a village, I think. And I think the potential of village building is that you're trying to almost alter the terms of your relationship with somebody,
Mhm.
right? It's not this sort of
It's a lot
short,
more intimate, right? And it
yeah,
is ongoing. It's not,
yes,
would you
it
like
is
to have dinner
ongoing
with
and there's
us
a
sometime?
100%. So, like, I think when you pay somebody to do something, there's implicit there this understanding that, like, hey, if you walk out of my life at this point, right, like, we're already settled up,
Yeah,
right?
that's what the
This
money is
doesn't
for.
go
It means
beyond.
you're quits, right? Like everyone can walk away at the end and there's nothing left over.
Exactly. And that doesn't lead to village building,
Yeah.
right? Because village building, what you want is almost an understanding of, like, hey, I can do something for you and we don't even need to settle up because you're going to
Hmm.
be in my life
Yep.
next week and the following week, right? That's what you want. And I will say that's what baby swap turned into, right? I watch these kids all the time, even outside of
Hmm.
Tuesdays and Thursdays, weekends. We've done overnights, right? It's turned into something where we can make requests of each other. without this sort of like, well, who owes what? You know what I'm saying?
And that's
So
like
I
a
think,
bigger thing than you can pay for, right? Because I've talked to other families where it's like, occasionally we go on a date, but we could never go anywhere overnight unless the grandparents are involved,
yeah,
right? Because there's not the level of trust you need to leave someone with your kids overnight or to ask for that big a commitment. And we've been lucky enough. We had to talk about when we were having our third, especially depending on how fast labor could happen and where our families were. We're like, who in our neighborhood could we ask to stay in our house overnight and take our kids to school the next day? We could think of people, which was great. One thing I'm curious about is I've heard a lot of families who kind of make these small recurring commitments or even a small first ask that they almost operate like guide wires for a bridge. That because you've done a favor for me and I've done a favor for you, and they've been favors that have been manageable for us, suddenly I need a big favor and I
mhm,
feel comfortable asking because there's that habit of life together. Have
yeah.
there been moments where either of you in your baby swaps have needed something much bigger than the baby swap where it's felt natural to ask each other?
Yeah, I mean, well, I guess you could say even right now we're going, one of the people in this baby swap, the person that I started it with initially, she just had her third child, and she has to go to London, right, to get her, visa or the baby's passport. I can't remember what it is. Something she's got to do. And so she just asked me like, "Oh, can you just like take my kids for the night or whatever?" So I guess, I mean, maybe not like huge things, but like that doesn't feel huge to me
Mhm.
anymore. Maybe it would have, but maybe that's kind of what you're
I
getting
think a
at.
lot
Like
of
it doesn't.
folks do not have someone who can take their kids for the night on medium
Yeah.
notice, even.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, so yes. I mean, the answer is
Mhm.
yes. I think that had we not been doing this kind of reciprocal watching of each other's kids, and we haven't really talked about this, but I think another big thing is her kids feel very comfortable in my house, right?
Mhm.
So it
Yep.
feels very natural to sort of be like, well, yeah, if I'm gonna have somebody watch them overnight, it would be great if it could be somebody's house where they already kind of know where everything is and they feel very comfortable. So
Yep.
I think that probably it's like there you need the trust with the kids too, if that makes sense.
So I'm curious just for the logistics, when you're watching kids overnight, like how many beds do you have in your house? How
Oh
do you
my
have enough
gosh.
space to be able to kind of take another family? Because I have friends with very large families, and it's harder to picture like, okay, and then baby swap night, like we take your 7 kids, and add them to ours.
Well, we've never had like a sleepover where it was just tons of kids that
Mhm.
needed to go down. But with a couple of kids, we have a guest room with almost like a day bed, which for you can fit quite a few kids in there. So anytime we do have sleepovers, usually the kids, they're all pretty close friends, so
Yeah.
they kind of want to
There's the
sleep in the
big
same
pile.
place.
Yeah.
Yeah, they just kind of sleep in a pile. That's what it
Mhm.
is. That's another,
Makes sense.
that's another thing where you got to lower your standards
Yep.
if you're
No,
gonna
I
send
think
my
that's just a normal way that kids hang out, right?
yes, like, if you're
Once
okay
we
with your
take the
kids
bars
sleeping in a
off of
pile, that's fine.
my middle daughter's bed, like we know they're just going to be in beds together,
Yeah.
once she's not in the crib cage.
Yeah, I mean that's what my kids do. They're just always I can't get them to stop doing that.
Mhm.
So, yeah.
And you got this started during the pandemic, which I think gave people a kind of permission they didn't otherwise had. Everyone
Yeah.
knew that the rules were different for the moment. It
Hmm.
wasn't totally clear what the new rules were, what you could get away with, but because it was a crisis, you're allowed to say, will you watch and watch my baby? Can I come to this meeting with my baby? All these things changed and flexed.
Yeah.
But now that the pandemic is over, it's not technically an emergency anymore. And I think it's easy for parents to think, okay, instead of me being able to trust that everyone else also has a problem, I have a problem. It's a me problem, a personal problem about how I'm parenting. How would you advise other parents who want what you have to make a small step in this direction without that permission structure of everyone knows this is a catastrophe?
Yeah. Well, okay, so I would say I can't remember where I got this from. This is not my suggestion. Somebody else told me this, and I think that it's true. Like, in my experience, if you offer to do things for other
Mhm.
people, it's very hard to get them to actually take you up on the offer.
Yeah.
There are people that I've been trying to sort of rope into this thing for a long time. And I find when I say, hey, I'd love to, if you ever need somebody to watch your kids, like, I'm there, I'm right over here across the street or whatever it is, and people are very hesitant to do that. So I do think that asking somebody for help is just a better way of resetting the terms of the relationship, right? Because even if they say no, so that would be my suggestion.
Yeah.
Just instead of hiring a babysitter, pick somebody in your neighborhood and be like, "Hey, I'd really like to go out to dinner with my husband or whatever it is, or doctor's appointment, la la la," and just be like, "Would you mind watching my children for whatever?" Because even if they say no, and even if they initially think, "Oh, that's weird, why aren't you just getting a babysitter?"
Mhm.
It plants this idea in their head of like,
I
"Huh,
I
she
could
thought
ask
that
for
was
this? Is
like,
this allowed?
yeah,
Right.
yeah, exactly. Like, she thought that was a normal thing to ask. So why don't I think it was a normal thing to
Mhm.
ask?" Right? So you can kind of do that, and then also definitely if they say yes, then it is, in my personal opinion, it's so much easier to ask for help if you already
Yes.
know that, like, I've helped this person before. Um,
Yeah, I think
I don't know,
people
that would be
want
my
to
suggestion.
operate from the position of strength as a giver, and that also feels less intimidating to do. But I also find it so much more natural to build up a relationship when you begin as the asker, because
Yes.
the other person is magnanimous and knows you are someone who thinks it's normal to ask for help,
Yep.
which is just not clear otherwise. And
Yeah.
I like your advice because it kind of suggests you're doing a good service if you scandalize your neighbors, which I think is what people worry about. Like, why would
Yes.
someone ask this of me? I'm not a babysitter. They have money. Um, that, if
Yes,
you're
I agree.
scandalizing them, you're sort of helping change the expectations in your neighborhood gradually, right? Like they might need several people to scandalize them in a row before this doesn't sound crazy. But
I
why
think
does this sound crazy is the other thing. Like it's very normal, broad scope of human history, to have people in your community who watch your kids for no money, and who trust you to watch theirs. But I think you're right that it's not the first thing people think of. And it's probably a little surprising to say, would you watch my kids for nothing? Like just for me, right? And even especially things to make the ask and not go, I promise I'll make it up to you, right? Like with that promise of quits again. So how did we get to a point where just normal dependence on each other is so bizarre or shocking.
man, now that is
Like
a good
taking off all
question.
your clothes, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, that's a great question. I think that there are just tons of, like, there are lots of things there. We have other options, right? It is possible to sort of like hire a babysitter, right? We have systems for that. We have lots of other things competing for our time. I think this is actually another area where intensive parenting gets in the way of village building. People have very overscheduled
Yep.
lives, and so if you are not physically around to be there for somebody in your neighborhood because they're off at soccer practice or whatever it
Mhm.
is, right? Um, it just doesn't happen, and when it doesn't happen, then it doesn't feel normal, right? So I mean, there's just so many things I think that come into play. Cars, I'm everybody knows I'm like anti-car. But I think car dominance is a big anti-community invention because it
Yeah,
sort of
so I
isolates
ride I
people,
ride a cargo trike with my kids, and it means we're all open and exposed to the world when we're
Yes.
riding. So we stop and talk to people, and people can see us going by. They go, "Oh, it's my friend Beatrice riding by," not "a car is passing," right?
Yeah, a car that could have like whoever
Anyone.
in it.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah, so I mean there's just a lot that I think is really, and I think that is an important point because I think that like some people in response to that thread kind of pointed out like, well, you know, in the past people had very strong sort of cultural norms, and you didn't have to like deal with these big differences in parenting styles because everybody kind of believed the same thing. And maybe that's true in the past, but like we're talking about village building, in 2024, and things are different. And so you have to reckon with these these kind of different things, like the circumstances are materially different. And so I think it just calls for a different set of expectations, I guess.
Yeah. Well, I think the last thing I'd like to ask you is who's someone you take as a model, whether as a writer or in your own life, for building communities and extending yourself a little past what's technically normal or sane in the prevailing culture?
So the person that I'm thinking of who, oh gosh, oh my gosh, I'm gonna like panic and not be able to think of anybody. But like the person that I was referring to who gave me the idea of just like asking for something was actually Ezra Klein because he did a podcast sort of about the isolation of like um uh of raising young kids and how weird it is that we're all doing
Mhm.
it in a very lonesome way. So I guess I should mention him.
Yeah,
Um,
give him the shout out.
yeah, but then I don't know. I mean, a lot of it is just people that I know, like the person that I would say my friend who I started this with, I think I take inspiration from her because, I'm the one who technically threw it out there, right? And was looking for somebody to do this, but it only works because there was another person who was like, yeah, okay. And she has always done exactly, she's always sort of honored the terms here of being like, yeah, okay, I'm not gonna like she's got her own systems and she has oh my gosh, she's one of those she's a very skilled homemaker. Her house is incredibly clean and very well organized all the time. It's so unfortunate that she has to be in my village just because I feel so bad all the time. But anyway, so she's good at what she does as a homemaker. And she sends her kids over to me. She sees my house all the time that is just sort of like, "Oh wow, you still haven't cleaned up the crayon on the walls from like 2 years ago. Wow." You know what I'm saying? And she
Great also
doesn't
because
mind that.
I think it's also so good for kids to see a variety of families and ways to parent, right? So when they think about growing up and having a family, they do think I have a range of options, and like all these families I'm friends with hopefully are pretty happy. I think of, that I have a friend where her house is a big mess. Like she knows it. I'm not going to say her name, but she knows it's a big mess. Her kids are pretty crazy. They all love
I'm
each
that
other.
friend.
And we
Yeah.
have a great time visiting. It doesn't bother me that it's messy. It would bother me if my house were that messy all the time because it would stress me out. Um, and then I have a friend where, we were visiting them. They let us stay over while we were on a road trip. And then after the kids had gone to bed, the mom brought out like a tray, like a little cheese tray for us, like on a little tray that she carried out. I was like, wow, it has never occurred to me to do something like this for a guest. And I'll be honest, I do not do that most of the time, but I liked knowing it was an option. I've tried it out a couple times, and I like as a parent seeing the range of successful parenting and knowing that I'm trying to pick the option that works for me and my family and the balance of kids I have, but not the best version of parenting because there's a lot of good enough parenting.
100%. And I can say that like specifically like if we want to go back to my weirdness about my like
Mhm.
fears about screens and stuff, one thing that has definitely become apparent over time is that I'm kind of like, okay, like the one little girl in this group who has a tablet, right? She's also the kid who like the few times that I'll like put on a movie for the kids when they come over, she's usually the one who's sort of like, oh, I'm just kind of bored by TV. I don't want to do it. So I have sort of, she does not at all appear to have sort of some kind of like addiction
It's
to
not heroin
screens,
for
right?
her. Yeah.
That has been a learning experience for me where I'm sort of like, okay, other people do things in different ways and it doesn't seem to be a disaster, right? And so, yeah, I think that's good for me to know that, to get
Yeah.
out of my head about, screen fear.
Well, Stephanie, thank you so much for chatting with me today. I love what you built, and I'm going to ask readers of Other Feminisms to really consider doing what Stephanie suggested and asking someone in the next 2 weeks, not like in the sometime future, to watch your kids or to do something for you that feels like it would be just up to at least the border of unreasonable to ask for, and see what happens and let us know. Thank you so much. I hope there are a couple baby swaps or other generous, sustained things that come out of this, or even just a single good night where a neighbor can help you and you turn out to help them several months later because they knew you were a person they could ask. Stephanie, thank you for your work and for your story.
Thanks so much for having me. This was great.